Welcome back to Apollo City Comics. I'm Brandon Blocksdorf.
And I'm Alex Batts.
And I don't really have a new segue intro into the whole thing. Now that we've kind of rearranged and reshuffled, it kind of hit me right now. We usually have the trifecta thing going on, but we haven't dual wielded since we brought you on.
You were halfway through that, and I was like, he hasn't done this with it in an interview yet. And I was like, I don't know how he's gonna get through the end of this.
New format. So, wow, we'll figure it out. Add it to the list. That's what it's been like the last couple weeks, to be honest. Because after this Kickstarter, after everything that's kind of happened, and wrapping up, just prepping the financials, the royalties, the advertisements. If you've noticed, our social media has been a little slow lately, just because we've been fried out, kind of toasted after reaching out and interviewing and doing all this type of stuff. And just to give you guys an update on that, it's going off to the printer this week, so we'll have a proof. And once we get that proof approved, we'll be sending out some books and a lot of goodies. And we have Max Flowers, who you could catch hanging out with us over on Drawing Shit, and Milo from El Gato Prints, who actually made all the patches and the posters for the Kickstarter that are going to be in everyone's physical packages. They'll be hanging out with us on YouTube Live, so check out that episode. If you're listening to this late, or if you're listening to it early, you probably hang out with us tonight, so hang out with us. And quick little Cyberpunk anthology update. How's it going over there, Alex?
Pretty good. Yeah, submissions are still open. Again, we're right on closing in. By the time this episode goes up, probably we'll be at a month left for submissions being open. So they're open until July 10th. You can find all the info for that on my social media. It's like Brandon was saying, a cyberpunk anthology there's a prompt that goes along with it too, dealing with a neural implant that lets you kind of experience what someone else is. So yeah, super exciting. Like I said, I've gotten some cool submissions for that. I know a bunch of people that are working on stuff for it. So I'm very excited for how that's already shaping up to be. And yeah.
Awesome. And I mean, Kickstarters are never ending. We're always helping other people. We're always trying to support other creators. We're always trying to bring other creators on, especially creators who aren't in our little LKC network, because we do try to branch out past that, because there's so much more out there besides the LKC universe. And this is Apollo City Comics, so we're trying to find everybody. And we came across this book called Z Class, and our creator, Kevvo, reached out to come hang out with us and join us. And today, dude, I'm so excited to hang out with you. Welcome to Apollo City Comics.
Hello, thank you. Thank you so much for letting me be here.
Definitely. Z Class is a really interesting looking book, and it's aimed towards kind of a younger audience. Right off the bat, you could get that feeling from it. Really quick, fill us in on these listeners who haven't heard of Z Class, because this is book 2 of your series. There is a book 1 that you can get as well. Kind of catch us up to what the book is about, a quick premise.
Yeah, absolutely. So the quick story, Z Class is a most ages YA superhero graphic novel. It's about kid superhero team. The first book, Z Class at the Beginning, is when we meet all of the kids, and this is when the team forms originally. I say it's a most ages book. It's probably great for 4th, 5th grade and up, but my goal is to also have something that's kind of interesting for adults to read too. I think it's a lot of fun. I think it's a good story, and hopefully readers will think the same thing. And I've gotten some positive feedback already on it, so it makes me optimistic.
Well, we were fortunate enough to check out the first volume of it that you sent us, the first 3 issues of everything, and it was one of the funnest. It's hard for me to choose comics especially when it's a younger age group, but recently I've really dived into some of them, and just the fluidity you have to have when you're crafting a young A book is so much more specific, I feel, than when you're making it for a mature reader or for adults. I feel like it's more difficult to be concise and just almost to the point with being fun and upbeat and pushing a story along. Can you tell me about that, if there was any difficulty to that part of the craft?
So I was really lucky when I was writing the first book that I had some beta readers who were able to give me feedback. And among those beta readers, I had a middle school English teacher. I had a journal editor. But anyway, I had people that were specifically involved with working with kids all the time. So my challenges, basically, I figure it's easy enough to just tell a story, but how do you tell it so it's going to be accessible for kids, and so kids will understand it as well. And I had great people that could give me feedback on that. Actually, the pushback that I got, the biggest pushback that I can think of, is there was a word I didn't want to use in the book, and they were like, "No, kids would actually say the word." And so, I mean, it's in the first chapter, the word "fag."
That's
I didn't want to use the word. I was like, "That's just too much for kids," and they're like, "No, this is what kids are actually saying in middle school, so do it." Yeah, but otherwise, I mean. Um, I read a lot of YA books, and so it's really easy for me to get into that mindset of writing for YA. And yeah, and some of the kids are based on real kids that I know, and so I think that really helps me as well to sort of figure out how to craft a story around them.
That's so awesome. That's so great hearing. It's almost refreshing compared to a lot of the creators we have, because it's all very adult themed. Even our books, we have
Yeah,
a lot of like Teenage Babylon and whatnot. Like even when I try to kind of aim for something, it doesn't come out as like soft as I'd want it to be. It's a bit
yeah,
more harsh, and I kind of admire that because it feels like I don't know, just like that youthful aspect to get kids into comics. And the comics we're making aren't necessarily the comics that might get a kid into comics. You know what I mean? You're starting off at such a a lower level, which is honestly the smartest thing I think a creator could be doing, and the best thing a creator could be doing is reaching out to that type of audience.
yeah. Thank you. I appreciate that. So, content-wise, it's not really difficult for me at all. It's pretty easy for me to stay sort of in that kid accessible range. Concept-wise is where it gets a little bit more tricky for me. I feel like so I have spent a lot of time reading X-Men comics. Like that
Hmm.
was really what inspired a lot of this, because you've got these kids that are born with these special abilities. And when you read old Chris Claremont X-Men, or even the current stuff that's happening with Hoxpox and everything, it's really complicated and convoluted. And there's so many different things going on at the same time. And I'm trying to do some of that in these books, and I'm thinking this might be too much. So that's where having beta readers is really helpful too, because they can tell me you got too much going on here. Like let's chop out some of these storylines. As it is, I'm afraid that I might already be digging a little deep into some of these side stories. But to your point, I do want to make books that will hopefully make kids comic book readers that for the long haul, and we'll keep them coming. And so to that end, maybe it is smart to have comics that get a little bit convoluted in there, because hey, that's what comics are, you know.
Yeah,
Yeah,
no,
definitely.
that is definitely comics. It's wild that you mentioned the X-Men. I'm a huge X-Men fan.
Hmm.
And I hadn't really made, at least consciously, that connection as far as like, oh yeah, this is a group of kids like in a school and they have powers and stuff. It hadn't occurred to me while I was like reading through the book. But yeah, you can definitely see that, and it definitely works on that level, I think. And also for me personally too, I think you did a really great job at just making it like an entertaining read even for adults. And I'm also not, it's kind of like what Brandon was talking about. Like the books that I write they're definitely more adult, more like dark. And like a lot of the like movies or shows that I watch or anything, like it's definitely more on the dark side of stuff. And like young adult stuff is kind of a hard sell for me. But like I sat
Yeah.
there and and to read this and just kept flipping through, like going through the pages. And I was like, no, this is a very fun read. And like it just also too feels very earnest to like how the age group acts. So yeah, I think you did a really good job there.
Thank you. I appreciate that feedback. I take kids really seriously. I take kids and the things that are going on in their lives really seriously. And at the same time, some of it is just stupid. And so that's where I feel like we can bring in some of the humor.
Yeah.
Like, just when you step back and look at what's happening, like this is a little ridiculous. Like, I mean, you've only seen the first three chapters of it, so there's more that happens. But like, just like they're running around town, these kids are running around town in masks. Like this is just ridiculous. Like, who does
Hmm.
this? And yet they do this. And so yeah, my goal is to have something, like I said, that kids can read and really get into and see themselves. And I think I'm doing that all right. But I also want it to be something that adults can read and appreciate and laugh at, and hopefully cheer for the kids and really get pulled into the kids stories too.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's one of the hardest things some, adult readers kind of have. I feel like with books like, I mean, when you look at the mainstream stuff that's out there, when you look at like, was it Super Sons and whatnot, that's the closest we get kind of
Hmm.
to any sort of young A type of teams almost. And maybe some like Young Adventures stuff. Does Young Adventures even still come out? I'm not even too sure.
I have no idea.
No idea.
I'm trying to think.
Yeah,
Because
like
I know DC does like an okay job of having younger. I see them in their solicits sometimes. I never really look at them because I'm not the target audience, and I admittedly just kind of like scroll past. But I know like every now and then they have a couple of like specifically targeted young A books, but it's not a very extensive thing that they really try to like hammer home on, which they should. Like it's
Yeah.
honestly wild thinking about it now that they don't try to like capitalize on that market more.
Yeah, exactly. And I feel like it's kind of all aimed towards us, and as a mature reader at this point, Alan Moore and all them in the 80s really just did a number on stuff. Frank Miller, you know what I mean? But I that's what I admire the most, is just I realized it once I was going through it, like just enjoying a fun childhood, kind of like almost like when you're watching Cartoon Network, like Kids Next Door and things like that. Like it brought me back to like those kind of moments, and I was like, why don't we have a young X-Men team book where it's just the kids and everything? Like,
Why don't we?
Yeah,
exactly. And then on top of that, so one of the things that I really I talked about a lot with the first book when I was promoting it, is that like when I was growing up as a queer kid, I didn't see myself represented in any of the books.
Yeah.
Like when you would see queer characters, they were usually really sexualized, or they were punished for being queer in some way. I mean, I grew up in the 80s, so it was a little worse then than it is now in books. But like kids' books, you never see. Well, that's not true. Now it's changing, but for a really long time, you never saw queer characters represented, particularly queer kids. And so that's something that I really wanted to try to touch on as well. I did actually this weekend. I did my first Pride Fest as a vendor, as a comic creator. I didn't even know if graphic novels would work at Pride or not. So I gave it a try, and it was amazing. Like seeing these kids who are at Pride, who were coming out to the booth, and like some of them had read the book, most of them had not, and so but they were super excited about this. And I'm like, this is you. Like you're in this book. I
That's
will
just
say
like a
though,
beautiful picture, like
Yeah,
Pride
yeah.
and a bunch of
great.
kids going up to comics, like that just like made my heart like warm. I
Yeah.
love that. Like,
I mean, I shouldn't be surprised, but the amount of overlap between comic lovers and queer people is pretty it's pretty tight. And so there were a lot of comic lovers that I got to meet at Pride. I should give the caveat though. A friend of mine, after reading the first book, said that it wasn't as gay as he was expecting it to be. And so it is actually as gay as you think it is, but you have to read more in order to dig into it.
I could get like
Because
senses of it like in the beginning, and I wasn't sure what to like. I didn't like watch your Kickstarter video until I never watched Kickstarter videos. I didn't watch until after I read it, and then after that, I was like, okay, so I think I know where this like could be going in some directions. Like
maybe
it's
you
kind of
think you
interesting.
do, and maybe you don't. See, that's the thing. I basically I want to have a story that is accessible. I want parents to not freak out when the book comes into the house, and so I want it to be really easy to sort of ease into that. Specifically, like I see the trans legislation that's happening all over the country right now, and I see the way that queer people are being attacked with legislation across the country. And like as I see this, I want kids to be able to read a comic book like this and say, well, that's not what I know queer to be. Like because I'm reading about it in these comics, and I've spent 5, 6, 7 issues getting to know this character and getting to know that they're just really like anyone else, you know. That's my goal too. And so I feel like if I hit you over the head with a gay character right out of the gate, that might be off-putting. And so I'm trying to sort of ease people. At the same time, a friend of mine points out you kind of see what you're looking for in it. So I think if you're looking at it through a queer lens, you can pick up on things more readily. I hope you can anyway.
I think it's hitting that important balance of like, yeah, of course, like you want more representation, and like we definitely need that to be there, but also it's in the fact of presenting it really earnestly. It's like these relationships and these experiences aren't like you're not going through life like shouting all the time like I'm gay and like look at my like girlfriend or boyfriend or whatever, you know, like you're not, that's not how you live, you know, your everyday experience. It's not this like, as you were saying, like hitting you over the head with it type thing. It's just like,
Yes.
you're a person, like you're a normal person, this is like how you live your life, you know, and like this just also happens to be part of you, like, and so it's getting that balance. And like you were saying, like if you know this and understand, so you're like, okay, like I see myself in that, and like you are looking for those kind of things, and it's like that kind of representation is very important, and I think a good thing to see.
Yeah,
So yeah.
you're exactly right. And then to that end too, I'm working with adolescents in these books, and so a lot of them are just finding out that they're even
Yeah.
queer. Like they don't even know when the books start they've got a queer life ahead of them, which I think hopefully is kind of cool for kids who are reading this who might actually be questioning like what are these feelings that I'm feeling, and then seeing it reflected in these books. That's my hope anyway. And if they're not feeling those things, then it's a window into somebody else's experience and hopefully humanizing this thing that you don't really understand.
I think, one of the coolest things, I have a lot of LGBT characters in my story, and it's just, I've always tried to go out to friends to get feedback and just make sure I'm like hitting things right. And I've never
Yes.
had any pushback. And they're just like, so what do you like, as like a straight, like white male, basically, writing about these characters, like, where do you get insight? And I'm like, when I approach characters like that, it's just, I write them as like just people. Like I write them
Right.
as human beings, like, and
Can
it's
you
not one of
imagine?
the, yeah, it just baffles like a lot of people where you're just like, oh, if I just write them as like a human and
Right.
maybe add some, personality, that's what's
Right.
going to make some of these characters and make them stand out. But it's when you uncover personality traits and like things like that, that's when you really get to know them. And when you know them, that's when that might matter. But if you just write them as like a human being, I mean,
Yeah.
those were all my friends that I'm basing it off of and people I've known, and that's where I take it from. So it doesn't feel like shocking or like, over the top, because it's just like that's life if you just kind of like look past,
Yeah.
the veil a little bit and just like listen to people. And I
Yeah.
love that you're doing that at that age. Again, you're just like kind of hitting so many cool milestones on a book that's so important and a topical thing right now. Like what you're saying, bring into house as a household item that's like easy and comfortable to get to know. I mean,
Yeah.
I feel like there's some people who just don't know how to approach it without being very bombastic about it. And having it come in this direction, it's like, oh, calm the fuck down and
Right.
let's just hang out. And
Right.
this is how it is. And that I love that. I really admire that aspect.
No, thank you. I appreciate it. Now, and I agree. Like, I feel like it's easier to tell a story if I am basing them on people that I actually know, because then it's just like, well, what would, for
Yeah.
example, one of the characters in this is named Eleanor, and she's based on a friend of mine named Eleanor. And so it's really easy for me to be writing and thinking, well, what would Eleanor do in this situation, and sort of reflect on that. At the same time, I also recognize that I don't feel qualified to necessarily tell every story. And so
Hmm.
my goal is, with the next book that I'm working on, not the one that's on Kickstarter now, but the one coming after that, I'm actually hoping to have a co-writer on that one, because there's a couple of really important stories that I want to tell that I don't necessarily feel qualified to tell. And so having somebody else can sort of come in and help me to tell those stories more effectively. Like the superhero stuff, I got that. And the interpersonal stuff, I've got a lot of that, but like what it is to be a particular, to live a particular experience that is outside of my cis white experience. Um, I just feel like it's really beneficial. Plus, honestly, I just love to have collaboration. Like that is my
Yeah.
favorite.
Yeah.
So
Networking is one of the best. And just like adding more people to the roster you get to work with is so rewarding.
yes, absolutely. I feel like I was spoiled with the beta readers for the first book, because that felt like collaboration to me, to have these people that could read it and give me feedback. And so, yeah, with the next book that comes after Trix, my plan is to have another author, another writer with me on that book.
Cool. That's gonna be exciting.
Yeah.
Where did writing and art kind of take its place in your life? How did that all become like your foundation?
Okay, so to start, I don't feel like a writer, and I have to be reminded that technically I've written a book, so I guess I am a
Yeah.
writer.
Yeah.
Um, but I say that because that's where I guess I feel the weakest. That's where I feel the most vulnerable, is in the writing itself. And so this is why having an additional writer come on is super helpful. The art side of it, the drawing side, it was actually my kindergarten teacher who told my parents that I was going to be an artist. And I've just been drawing ever since. I went to school for comics. I went to SCAD in Savannah, got my degree in comics, and actually, what the evolution of Z Class itself. So I've been drawing comics, like comic strips, for years and years, ever
Oh,
since
cool.
college. But Z Class actually came from, prior to the pandemic. I was working with somebody on a YA superhero graphic novel about a single queer kid superhero, and the pandemic happened. we kept working on the book, but ultimately it just didn't. It fell apart, which is super frustrating because the book is literally ready to print right now, but we're not there at the moment.
Yeah.
So, and when I realized that that was going to happen, I was like, well, I'm too excited. Like there's stories that need to be told. I'm just too into this right now, and that's when Z Class came into existence. Yeah, I knew I wanted to put into practice all the things that I've been working on in the previous graphic novel. And going back to what I was saying earlier, like X-Men was a huge inspiration to me. Power Pack actually was something that I read in the 80s that like kid superheroes. And so that inspired it. And I've always, when I was in college, I went to school to study comics because I was into the Jim Lee stuff that I was seeing in the 90s. I was into the Silvestri stuff, like the pinup, really
Yeah.
cool X-Men comics and things like that. And then I got into college and I realized that I was really more into storytelling through comic strips, like For Better or For Worse by Lynn Johnston,
Okay.
Calvin and Hobbes, Peanuts. For Better or For Worse is the one that comes to mind prominently because she tackled some really heavy stuff like death and queer characters and divorce. Really heavy stuff, and she did it in the comics, the comic pages of the newspaper, and that so basically in college I realized that's really where I was, and so I've been doing comics, like comic strips, ever since. And so comic books, it's sort of a newer thing from the last, I don't know, 5 years or whatever, that I've gotten back into doing comic books so much.
That's so
But
interesting.
and
For
I don't
better or
even know
for
if I
worse,
answered your question.
I don't remember it, but I just like went on like three other things I wanted to ask you about as well. For better or for worse, gosh, it took me a moment to catch into that one. But yeah, I used to read that one in the Sunday newspaper,
Yeah.
and the just reading it as a kid, I was kind of like, I don't get where this is, because you go from Peanuts to like that, and you're just
Yeah.
like, I just don't get like. And as an
She
adult, as I was growing up, I was like, man, I fucking get this one now. Like it just made more sense. It's almost like the Love and Rockets of like comic strips.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
Like
Yeah.
they had to print different versions of the comic strips particular weeks because there were certain newspapers like in the South or whatever that would not run a same-sex marriage strip, and she had a whole week of same-sex marriage comics, and so they just had to run something separate. And those like that's the kind of stuff she was doing, and this was like in the 80s that she
Yeah.
was doing this. So yeah, she's a personal hero of mine. Yeah, and yeah.
We do got to connect you with our co-host Brandon. He's working on a comic strip right now too, called
Awesome.
Polterkitten, and it's about like a deceased cat that's like hanging out with its like former owner and whatnot. It's kind of gruesome, but it's like really sweet and it's really adorable. And he's on the whole Calvin and Hobbes. Comic strips are where he's at that point.
Yes.
And stuff like that. I mean, I think that's one of the things that some of us, that was our first exposure to comics, the Sunday paper, Peanuts,
Oh yeah. Yeah.
things like that. And it's always like humorous, and I love seeing it still. And it's like that's almost like the roots of comic books in the sense, is that
Oh yeah.
mass exposure through the Sunday paper. And I don't think enough creators kind of go back to that almost like really structured storytelling in one to what, 8, maybe 4 panels, and you get a whole point across. Did you ever find that challenging, or what was your approach to that?
I mean, I will say that you learn a lot when you're doing a comic strip like that because sort of like what you're saying, like you have to be able to be really succinct. Like you can't do a lot of embellishment. Like you have to be able to, within 3 or 4 panels, get an entire story across. Like and that's something that I still do. I have an ongoing webcomic called Gayish that I've been doing for, gosh, 6 years or so, 7 years. And yeah, it's a challenge, but I feel like it raises the bar. It makes me a better writer. I don't call myself a writer, but I would say that doing comics is actually really helpful in developing the writing side of it. The drawing side, I feel like that's the downside to it. I feel like with drawing comic strips, it really limits what I'm doing creatively because I'm trying to get this. I'm trying to do this regular comic on a daily basis. I'm not doing it right now, but for a while I was doing a comic on a daily basis, which means I had to draw really fast. I had to draw really simple drawings.
Mm-hmm.
And so now when I'm working on a graphic novel, I find that I have trained myself to draw comic strips, and I have to pull myself out of that and be like, no, 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 you've got the whole world now that you can draw. Like, let's put backgrounds in. Can you imagine? Because that's not something that you see a lot in my comic strips. And so I feel like my writing has really been enhanced by comic strips. My drawing, I need to push past the comic strips and when I'm working on comic book stuff.
I think that's the ultimate combo pack for like a young adult writer though, being quick and succinct with what you're getting across verbally and visually really fast, and it keeps your attention so quickly too, and you want that pacing, and I guess I could feel that pacing a bit more. You of course you're able to embellish a lot more in your books, and I haven't seen too many of your strips yet, but just in that aspect, you get something across so quickly in the strip, and then keeping a child's attention through however many pages of a book, almost impossible. I was like one of the few readers when I was growing up, and I'm sure it's way less now than it probably was then. But that's the thing, that's the goal, is to keep their attention and keep them entertained as you progress through the story. And comic strips, best way to do that. That's like a brilliant equation that just like dawned upon me. I think you've hit the nail on the head for keeping kids' attention through a comic in that sense.
I will say too, as far as the comic strips go, I draw fast. I draw really fast now because of comic strips. And so that was great. Like at Pride, for example, I was drawing portraits of people. And so I was knocking out 5-minute portraits of people. So that was another positive that came out of drawing comic strips. That I don't know if I would have been able to do that before. Although I've always been a pretty fast drawer.
That's really awesome. That's also something that I hadn't. It's another thing like the X-Men thing that while I was reading it, the comic strip influence is definitely like you can feel it, and especially in the pacing, like the pacing in the dialogue and the delivery of things, it keeps that very like it's got a very succinct pace to it, and on each page there's a very clear like setup and delivery, it feels, and like a very easy, it's like okay, and it makes it a very the story just flows really well because of it. I feel like it goes. It just contributes to the overall reading experience in a very great way.
Thank you. I appreciate that feedback. I think one of the biggest challenges with scripting, again, because I don't consider myself a writer at heart, I think one of the biggest challenges with scripting is figuring out what is the story that just this page is going to tell. How am I going to finish this page? Are they going to be turning to see what comes next, or is it the next scene going to be facing? And so all of the meta things that I have to be thinking about when I'm working on this, which I know is what every comic book scripter is thinking about when they're doing all of this. But then, it's just, that's the challenge that I'm working on. And I appreciate the feedback that it seems to be working with what you read anyway.
It's constant, I think so. Argument, proposal, conclusion, argument, proposal, conclusion. And that's how, getting those beats through, I mean, that's how you can get pacing through a story really quickly and advance a story really quickly. That's super cool. So, I mean, artistically, you're saying Jim Lee, Mark Silvestri, and being able to really simplify stuff at the same time. Would you like to really do an embellished, over the top, book like that, where it's just pure your art, just really detailed?
If you asked 16-year-old me, absolutely, for sure. Now, I think I'm having so much fun. So later in life, probably, I don't know, 5 years ago, I discovered Giant Days. And I loved that. I don't know if you've read that one at all.
No, I haven't.
So it's I love that book. And what I appreciate about that, it's the story of 3 girls who meet in college. And it's just their story all through college. It actually, the whole series ends with their graduation. But the pacing of that book, the way that they're characterized, the way that they tell jokes to one another, things like this, that really inspired the way that I pace my own stories, and the style of it and things like that. So that's really what informed a lot of what I'm doing with Z Class right now. I don't want to do exclusively that. So something that I have been working on for, over a decade is a more autobiographical story. And that would be probably more black and white, probably I don't really know how to describe the style that I would be working in, but it would not be like the superhero the comics of the 90s and things like that. I feel like that's not really my jam anymore. Like, I love to read it. Like, I love to see other people creating that and whatnot. But that's not really what I'm into drawing anymore. Um, so yeah, at this point in life, I mean, don't get me wrong. If Marvel offers me a contract, I'm not going to say no. But
Yeah,
at
yeah.
this point
Oh,
in
yeah.
life, I don't really see that that's where I want to be anymore. And I think it's because I've been exposed to so many other genres and so many other ways of telling a story through comics that I appreciate that there's so much more to it than just what I was reading when I was reading them in the 90s. Um, yeah,
I feel like a lot of creators go through that little growth spurt too, where I mean I do love my DC and Marvel, but recently I've kind of drifted more apart from it and found other Adrian Tomei and stuff like that where I'm just like, damn, this is getting my attention a lot more at
yeah,
this point. You know what I mean?
yeah,
But I mean the ultimate goal is always just to write Batman. But like I don't really have like a Batman story yet. You know what I mean? I've
right.
never had a a superhero idea, even though I clearly I love fucking superheroes. But it's just one
So
of those
when I was
things.
in college, I did write a script for a Power Pack story. So if Marvel is listening to this and they wanna hire me to do a Power Pack story, although I'll be honest, I'm so out of touch with Power Pack right now. Like, Katie's got a girlfriend. I just found that out like a year and a half ago or whatever. I'm like, I love these kids. I don't know anything that's going on with them, so I'm probably not the best suited to write that story anymore. But yeah, that's probably the closest I've come to a superhero story. And I feel like when I was introduced to comics, the art and the story were so intertwined, and it felt like so big and bombastic and things like this. And now that I'm reading more different types, more different genres and things like this. For example, I just read Genderqueer last week,
Nice.
week before last. Have you read that one?
I haven't read it. I have a copy though. I just picked it up when I was in New York in April.
So I consider myself a pretty progressive person. I consider myself a pretty knowledgeable person when it comes to stories of gender and sexuality and things like this. I learned so much reading Genderqueer. Like, it moved me. And it wasn't this bombastic, big, over the top, ridiculous story that I would have been reading in the 90s. Like, this was just so good, so personal, um, so simple in the way that it was presented. And like, I see that that's a thing that you can do in comics, and that's so inspiring to me. Like, that's what I want to do. So when I talk about doing an autobiographical comic, that's what I'm thinking about, is something like that. Like, yeah, that inspires me.
That's cool. I love hearing about like especially current modern books that are coming out that are like reigniting someone's like ideas or passions. Not that it doesn't happen too often, but like we always kind of go back to the classics. And like whenever I try to get refreshed for a book, I go to like Love and Rockets or something, and I'm trying to capture an essence there, you know. And I've heard a lot about genderqueer so far, and I was just like, all right, this is gonna be a fun, interesting dive because things like
Yeah.
that and Persepolis and like
Yes.
Funhouse, all those. I'm trying to like get more, kind of open up my vocabulary with comics in that sense, and go
Yes.
more that direction at this point.
The downside though that I found with that, this happened to me with Z Class. Like, I'm halfway through Z Class, like writing and drawing it, and then I read something and I'm like, this is so cool. I want to put this in my book.
Yes. Yeah.
But that means I
Yeah.
have to redo everything that I've done to this point. So maybe I just have to put that on a shelf and say that's nice and that's for somebody else.
You almost
So
need to detox a little bit before you go into like a writing sprint and just like really just put everything on the shelf for a bit, or just have one thing that you're taking care of slowly and not get too influenced for a little while.
you're exactly right. The problem is that the drawing takes so long that either I'm going without anything during the time that I'm drawing, or I'm halfway through the drawing and I'm like, I've got new ideas. Let's redo all of this. Which I will say, with Z Class at the beginning, I did end up redrawing the first two chapters.
Oh,
So I'm not doing that with the new book. I've already decided, like, the new book, I'm drawing it one time and that's it. But yeah, it's a risk.
it's one of those things like you're always seeking influence, and you're always, because I mean what you take in, Alex and I always talk about it, but it's kind of like your diet, and your diet is more than just what you eat and how you exercise, but it's what you're consuming, and what you're reading and watching. That's all feeding your body somehow and feeding your mind somehow, and it's going to
Yes.
influence you, both in your regular life decisions and creatively. So kind of having that fine line of like, what am I going to binge that's not going to affect my creative essence too much, but it's something I still love. Like, yeah, it's stuff like that. I totally know what you mean.
It's true. And then just being okay with compartmentalizing. So like, this is really cool. I'm really inspired about this, but it has nothing to do with the project I'm working on right now.
Yeah.
So let's just make these notes and put them over here and we'll pull that out later.
Yeah,
That's like one of my biggest hurdles is that I like get so I'm like, oh, this is so cool, and so are these like 6 other things, and I'm like, oh, how can I make these all like one story? And then I'm like, no, these don't all these can't all be one story. That's not how it works. Like, come on, just stop.
But it would be so epic.
Yeah, it's just it's terrible. And then also, like you were saying, learning and like broadening your vocabulary, and then also just like general knowledge and stuff, and like learning more and being like, oh my god, I need to redo like everything that I've already written because I now know a way better way to do all of it. You're like, this is a problem. Like,
I know. I heard somebody say recently though that it's a good sign if you go back to your first book and you're like, I could have done that so much better. It means you're growing. It means you're getting better. And I'm fully expecting. I'm fully expecting to cringe at Z Class at the beginning one day. I'm not yet, but one day, and that'll be okay.
Yeah. That's
so,
a good sign.
How far are you looking to make Z Class? How ahead of the future have you thought about it in that sense?
So great question. I'm not so number of books I don't know the answer to. There are stories that I want to tell though. There are 3 specific stories that I know that going into the first book I knew I wanted to tell, and so I want to go for as long as it takes to tell those stories. That's as the best that I can tell you. Now at the same time I realize that if I'm only doing 1 book a year, this is going to take me forever. So I don't know if I can pick up the pace somehow or what, because but more than that I don't know. But I do know that the stories that I want to tell feel really important to me, and they keep me going when I feel like I'm getting overwhelmed, that this is just going too slow, or I just don't know. But at the same, as I say that, there are these 3 stories that I want to tell, and the rest is just sort of happening as I write each book. Like, the characters are sort of informing what's going to happen next too. And so I don't know if something new is going to emerge in the next couple of books that I'm gonna be like, oh, now this is something that I wasn't planning, but now I really want to tell this story. And that's kind of exciting. I will say, after I finished the script or after I finished the whole book for Z Class at the beginning, and I sat down to write the script for Trix, it was like visiting old friends. Like I hadn't actually. It took me 2 years to put together at the beginning, and so it had been easily a year and a half between writing the first script and writing the script for Trix now. And so it had been a year and a half that I hadn't been hanging out with these characters, and so it was really fun to just kind of sit there and come up with this new story and what's happening next. So it's going to take as long as it has to take to get these important stories out. I think the kids have a few years that are going to be involved in these stories, and the first book took place in September. The second book is taking place in October, and the third book is taking place in October. So I am not moving at any kind of decent pace to be done anytime soon, I'm afraid.
That's interesting. You know, I mean, even like comic strip like side offs, I think would be really interesting with some of these characters, little spoofs and whatnot. That'd be so cool to see how you merge like different things with that. And you know, with your other work, do you experiment in various styles, or do you kind of have, you know, one kind of strict style all the way through with embellishment or pulled back?
So I think they're different, but I don't know if other people think that they're different or not. I feel like that's the challenge when I'm working on a different project, to be like, this isn't Z Class, so I don't need to draw the characters in this particular way. And it's a challenge actually to get out of doing what I've been doing for so long. But I guess what that means is right now I'm just going to immerse myself in Z Class and do as much Z Class as I can until I get tired of it, and then I'll work on something else so that I can just push Z Class to the side and try to draw in a different way. My comic strip, you can tell there's influence. Like they both have some similarities, but I think they're really different. When I'm drawing them, they feel really different to me when I'm drawing them. So I don't know. The guy who I was collaborating with on the first graphic novel that didn't come into being, he saw my comic strips, and that's what made him think I would be good at doing a YA graphic novel. So, I mean, that might be your answer right there. There's no
There you
difference
go.
at all.
What do you? Is there anything in particular that you kind of do to get in your creative mindset, both for writing and for drawing? Like, do you have to put music on, or like have what, like a candle burning or whatever it might be? You know, that you have to like kind of
Yeah.
get into the zone whenever you go to, you know, actually pump out pages.
Okay, so the responsible answer would be that I just sit down. Honestly, when I'm creating, I will oftentimes listen to podcasts. Like I listen to a lot of podcasts when I'm creating. Um, the challenging part, though, is that it's really hard for me to draw. Uh, writing, I think writing, I can treat it more as a discipline, and with writing, I can just sit down and just decide, all right, I'm just going to write right now, whether I'm inspired or not. I'm just going to write. But with drawing, it's really hard for me to just sit down and draw if I'm not feeling it. Um, and yeah, and in that situation, if I'm really struggling, I will go for a walk, or I'll take a shower, or do something else that'll just sort of get the juices flowing. But then once I'm in the zone, like I just want to stay there. And so like I have made poor choices about not going to bed when I should, and things like this, just because I'm in the zone and I just want to draw, and I'm doing it because I can't count on being able to draw tomorrow. Like I can't count on being inspired and in that place. And I have to say, there's probably nothing more frustrating than sitting down to draw and I just can't do it. Like redrawing the same panel over and over again and just it's not working. Oh my gosh, it's just banging my head against the wall. And it's funny because I talk to kids a lot. Uh, in working on Z Class, I talk to kids a lot, and that is a question that comes up a lot from kids: is what do you do when you're not inspired, when you just don't have any ideas? And it's something that we work through together. Like I tell the kids my best plans, they tell me their best plans, and we all kind of agree that it's not something that you can just make happen, but you just do your best. And yeah, so
Yeah, it's really interesting. I have kind of the like opposite, like same problem but opposite situation where like I have a really hard time. Sometimes I kind of like it's a coin flip about whether or not I can like just sit down and force myself to write and like get writing done. It kind of depends
uh-huh.
on the project, but where yeah, a lot of the time where I just will not be sitting down to write because I'm like I don't feel like it. I'm not feeling inspired or whatever it might be.
Yes.
And there's a podcast that I know that Brandon recommended to me, You're a Storyteller. And like one of the things they mention on there is that you're still doing the work even when you're not sitting down doing the work. Because like it's still in your head, like you're still thinking about it. Or even if you are literally doing something completely unrelated, to then be able to free up that like mental energy and like get your mind off of it, and that'll then help you later down the line get to that
Yeah.
point where you are like, okay, I am here, I am doing this, I am in the zone now. And like that's when that can kind of flow and you are able to like, and that's why it feels so good, because you're like, oh, I spent all that other time like not being able to successfully do this thing that I'm trying to do right now. And so then you're able to like get
Yes.
through, and it's like super rewarding when you get there. But I think it's something that's helped me a lot recently, is to remind myself that like even whenever I am maybe like it feels like I'm procrastinating or putting off the things that I need to do, being like, no, I still like kind of am a little bit doing what I need to be doing. Like it'll get done and I'll get to that point. Like it'll be okay.
Seriously, my brain is going all the time. Even though I'm not actually producing something in front of me, my brain is going all the time trying to solve these problems and whatnot. And I think you bring up another really good point too. Like when I'm drawing the same panel over and over and over again, every time that I'm doing it wrong, I'm doing it like that's one more way that I don't want it to go. Like I'm at least progressing in that sort of direction. It's funny because with Z Class at the beginning, I wrote an entire first chapter. So the first chapter is about Anjali and her arrival at the school and whatnot. And I wrote an entire first chapter all about her and developing her powers and everything. Scrapped the entire thing, and now that's the prequel. One day I've got this script that's already written that I'm gonna use in a prequel at some point. But what was really great about it is that at the end of writing that, I knew Anjali so much better that I was ready to write her in the book. I knew where she was coming from. I knew what her background was. I knew how she got to this position. Um, and eventually I'll let the readers in on all of that too. So I think you're exactly right. Like even what you're doing right now doesn't go into the finished product directly. It could have such great indirect impact on it. So yeah, you're right. Thank you for reminding me of that.
Yeah, no, it's good. Like, even if you're drawing a panel and you feel like you're drawing it wrong every time, you're drawing it a little bit less wrong every time. You're
Right.
getting there. So
Hopefully.
yeah, it all goes
That's
into it.
that's so interesting you do that, because I've been working on my stories for, I have two books that are in progress right now, Teenage Babylon and Fake Your Death, and both of them I'm starting them with like small little ash can like character like bios, and they're just like little stories that I'm kind of writing so I understand the character, but also so that I could build my relationship with my artist a little bit more before we go into like the main big book, before the big issue one. So like Teenage Babylon, my anthology story that was in our punk, or yeah, my anthology submission that was in our punk anthology, that's like based off of Elliot, who's the main character in Teenage Babylon. So you read that, and then you jump into Teenage Babylon and see how he's changed and grown, but you see why he is the way he is once you get to issue one. And I love doing that with characters, just like, okay, what's happening before anything? Where are we starting on that day? And so I could just get a feel of how they move and how they think. And it's kind of almost a funner way of doing like a character description thing by just letting it kind of come out that way too.
Oh yeah, and that's how I do my world building too. In the first book, there's an allusion to this thing that happened 20 years ago. So I had to sit down and like write what happened 20 years ago. Like I need to have an idea about this because I want characters to be reacting to it in a real way. So I've got this whole story actually that is not part of these books at all. This whole story that I know exists in the background that is so helpful to me to being able to tell the story effectively. It feels honestly, it feels very Marvel MCU to me. I see the MCU and how like these little seeds are planted here and how they come into fruition like 30 movies later or whatever. And I'm like, okay, so I'm figuring all of this stuff out here, and eventually it'll all matter 30 books away. So
Yeah, it's I noticed that a lot when I was like kind of, I'm a big fan of Neil Gaiman's Sandman, and the way he drops plot points in the beginning of like volume 1 and 2, and then volume 3, 4 through 9 are about these little one panel things that happened and just like embellished and blew up upon. It's just like, whoa, how do you even like plant seeds like that to make it blow it up into things? But that's like almost, it kind of saves you as you're progressing through stuff too, because you might be planning stuff that you had no idea you're planning, and then it's going to pay off in the future too. So just kind of being mindful in that sense and observant of your own work, one of the best things you could do for continuous storytelling.
Oh yeah, and it feels more real that way too. Like if I'm just writing because I'm trying to fill this space, like it helps so much if I have a backstory behind it, because otherwise I can create these these dangling plot holes, but I don't know how to fill them. Like now I have to make this up, and sometimes that's cool. Sometimes I like the challenge of trying to figure out, okay, so how do I tie that in? But golly, it's so much easier if I've already got it figured out, and now I just have to figure out how to weave it in a way that's not too obvious.
Definitely.
And I think it's really also a very like real life thing whenever you do have these seeds or these things that can kind of feel maybe insignificant but impact the world in a very real way, because like that's what happens with events in your life. Like something will happen, you'll be like, oh, whatever, that wasn't a big deal. You might not think twice about it, but then if 5-10 years later you might be looking back and be like, oh wow, that one really small thing that I didn't think about ended up leading to this and then this and these 5 other things. It's actually, oh, that's why I'm a doctor now or whatever, it might be like. So yeah, it feels very genuine and real, because like that's what we experience.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, and it helps me to keep the characters real too. Like I think part of the world building, like writing all of this background, also helps me to shape the characters in a more real way, so that, to your point, they can stay consistent too. So like on who Anjali is in the first book is the same person she is in the last book. There may be evolution, and she may project herself in a different way in the world, but she's still the same character. And so because I've got this core that I know about her based on all the world building that went into it before I even put it on the page.
That's so awesome. And I feel like world building, when you're first starting off as like a creator or writer, sometimes it feels like kind of a drag to fill out some of those, like, okay, what do they eat for breakfast? Like, what's the relationship with this person? And it could be, and like, there's, two ways Alex and I have found a way around that to make it fun and engaging is one, find a character sheet that works for you if you're going to go the character sheet route. Shelley Bonds, from the editor from Vertigo Comics, she has a book called Filth and Grammar, and there's a really fun character sheet in there that we've been kind of like playing around with, and it's just a lot of fun. Plus, it's Shelly Bond, so it's gonna be dope, And the other way is like this: just having fun with finding a way to do it that works for you. If it's a prequel story, if it's a short script, but just finding a way to make it entertaining and fun. And I feel like what stops a lot of creators and writers is that they look at, I was taught this way, this is the only way I know how to do it. And you kind of need to expand and just bend the rules, make it work, and make it tangible in any way possible so that it can come to life and it'll work for you. It's one of the most difficult things to do, but like once you find it, it'll make everything fun, and every story is going to be engaging for you at that point.
Yes, absolutely. I completely agree.
And so your Kickstarter, I was actually kind of curious. You had it for a really long time. Is it because you had such an extended stretch goal, or what was
So I wanted it to be Pride Month. So that was
nice.
the really quick thing is I wanted to have it for Pride Month. So I'm doing a couple of Pride events over the course of June. And so one of them, of course, is the first weekend of June. One of them is the last weekend in June. So I wanted to have the Kickstarter campaign going over the entire month of Pride, because I'm hoping that maybe I'll meet people at Pride that would also be interested in Trix. But that would mean that I would have to drop it like Memorial Day. And that just didn't seem like a good day to launch a new Kickstarter campaign. My birthday happens to be the middle of May. And so I just figured, all right, well, then let's just do it for my birthday. We'll drop the campaign for my birthday, and we'll run it all the way through June. So yes, it's a longer campaign than the previous one, and probably it's a longer campaign than the next one's going to be. But I figured then I could just tell everyone, if you want to get me a gift for my birthday, just back my Kickstarter campaign. I've got all of the month of June to promote it. There are queer characters in Z Class. It's super pride friendly. And yeah, so that's why we ended up with a 45-day Kickstarter campaign.
That's so cool. That's such a great way to like bring that all together as well. Super exciting. That totally makes sense. That idea.
Yeah, it's such a perfect reason.
Yeah, you've got to know my birthday and you've got to know Pride, or in order for it to make sense. But yes, it does in my head.
I mean, it's kind of funny because we launched the Punk Anthology Kickstarter like 2 weeks after my birthday, because I was like, I'm going to enjoy my birthday, I'm going to have a big hurrah, and then I'm going to take a breather, and I'm going to jump into this damn Kickstarter. Because it's exhausting. I'm sure you might be pretty tired from promoting and reaching out and talking to people and all that type of stuff. How has your Kickstarter experience been, and why did you choose Kickstarter versus other crowdfunding platforms?
So Kickstarter. So when we were working on the graphic novel that did not come to be, we were planning to launch it on Kickstarter. So we put together a really great Kickstarter campaign, and so since the framework already existed, I just pulled that over for Z Class at the beginning. And I tweaked it a little bit for my book as opposed to the one that was previous. And then that just made the most sense to me. My experience with the first Kickstarter was great. I almost doubled my goal. So it was everything that I could have hoped for it to be. It was successful. Now that I'm doing this Kickstarter campaign, I realized that I forgot what it's like to be in a Kickstarter campaign. Because when I'm in the heat of it, I'm like, this is not fun. Why am I doing this? Like, I do not want to do a Kickstarter campaign. Life is easier when I'm not doing a Kickstarter campaign. And not to say that there's nothing fun about it. Actually, putting the campaign together is a kick. And I love getting feedback from people, and I love seeing it talked about and things like this. But being in the trenches of it and just like trying to like, well, we're up 1%. That's great. Like, that's what we want to do, and things like this. Yeah, I'm super excited to be done with the campaign. Actually, I'm super excited to send the book to the printer. So I've still got a couple of months before we get to that point. But yeah, that's where we are right now.
Nice. Who are you printing with? Can I ask?
Printing. Oh my gosh, Mix'em.
Mix'em. Okay, interesting.
Yeah.
We get a lot of. Yeah, pretty familiar. We work a lot with Comics Wellspring. I need to look into Mix'em more.
So I really like Mix'em because their prices were great, and because they're local to North America. So I was looking at other places that were overseas, and I could actually get cheaper printing costs, but then getting them shipped over, it went way above what I was getting. Yeah.
Comics Wellspring is out of the Great Lakes region too. If you ever
Oh,
checked them out.
fantastic.
Yeah, cool stuff. Yeah, it's always fun hearing like the self printing versus going to a company and stuff like that. Like I love the variations in indie comics on how they find the printing resources to move forward and whatnot.
Yes. And I had a great experience with Mixum for the first book. My plan is to go with them again for the second book. I mean, all my pricing is based on that, and
Mhm.
the only challenge is the paper shortage. So I hopefully we won't be dealing with the paper shortage this year. That's what we had last year, and it was, quite the challenge.
Yeah, that hit a lot of creators. I heard a lot of
Yes.
crazy stuff going on.
Yes.
Well, we're getting to about the 1 hour mark. This has been an awesome. Like, I'm not even like there's things I still want like to go over with you with, but being an X-Men fan,
Uh-huh.
if there was another title or any other title or a specific X title you'd want to take over if you could, what would it be?
Are we talking about the current
Any,
Hoxpox stuff?
any.
Because I feel really, I feel inadequate to tackle anything Hoxpox right now. But if we're talking about over the course of the history of X-Men, um, I think right now my brain is probably in a New Mutants sort of
Oh,
frame of
nice.
mind. Like I feel like there's enough similarity between New Mutants and Z Class that it would be a
Yeah.
pretty natural transition for me. Even as I say that, I feel like New Mutants characters weren't necessarily my favorites of them. I mean, I love some of the Mutants characters, but
Yeah.
like X-Men are really my favorite characters. But yeah, I would say New Mutants probably.
Who are your favorite like New Mutants and then also X-Men characters?
Damn, that's the question I was trying to avoid.
You couldn't. It had to happen.
We asked you before the show if there's anything we couldn't ask.
Yeah,
and that
you
was-
had your chance.
Well, now you've hit the wall. Did I say? So I start crying now. Is that what I said with the warning?
Yeah.
Okay, so favorite New Mutants characters. I would have to say. I mean, it's hard not to love Magic, and actually, Cypher is one that I really love because of. I've always been enamored of the idea that mutation doesn't have to be this big bombastic thing that involves lasers and all of this kind of stuff. And I've always been intrigued by the idea of having a mutation that is just so subtle but so useful and powerful. So I would say those two, and then probably Wolfsbane, because I just remember finding her as a little kid and being so intrigued by that character. As far as X-Men, I feel like the right answer is always Storm.
Yeah, you really can't. You can't go wrong with Storm.
I don't know that there is another answer that is better than her. Although, as I say that, Dazzler has always been a favorite of mine.
Icon. She's I love Dazzler so much.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, Cypher's great. I'm so glad you picked Cypher because I think one of my favorite things. I'm actually like the complete inverse of you. I've read all the Krakoan era stuff. I'm completely like caught up on all that. And like one of my favorite things has been the fact that they made like a Krakoan language, and Cypher was the fact that he had that role in that and was so prominent there. I'm like, yes, because like I'm a huge language nerd, and so I'm like, yeah, like this is so cool. This is the coolest thing ever, and like he absolutely should be this prominent. This is such a dope power, and so like yeah, that's awesome.
So one of the podcasts that I listened to talks about how they think Cypher might be like the mastermind underneath everything, that we don't realize the power that he's got yet, and it's going to blow up at some point. I don't know. I think that's a really intriguing idea.
Yeah, it's just so cool because he has such a intrinsic connection with Krakoa too because of all that, and like yeah, it's great. That's good stuff. Very good stuff.
So do you speak other languages as well?
No, I do not yet. That's something I need. Yeah, I know. I need to get on that. I should probably I'm a huge language nerd. Also, though, only one of them.
That's what I was gonna say. I mean, language nerd. Let's do it.
yeah. No. Do you speak anymore?
Je parle un peu de français.
Oh, nice. That was smooth.
I'm working on it. I wanna. My goal is to go to France, so I've got to get my French up there so I can do it. So
cool.
Yeah. So next time I'm on the podcast, we'll do the whole thing in French. That'll be great for me to practice my conversational French.
I'll be ready for sure.
Perfect. Which means I won't see y'all for years now.
We'll break out some Incal and Mobius, and we'll just like cover a whole book at that point. We'll just like take care.
Sounds
of all
amazing.
Well, it's been a blast. Before we wrap up, this has a few weeks left. Tell us where to find you and anything else to look forward to in the next couple weeks or months.
Okay, yeah. So Z Class Trix is really the one thing you'll be looking for me for at least the next few months. Z Class Trix is live right now on Kickstarter. It goes until the end of the month. So please take a look at it. If you love it, back it and share it with everybody that you know. I mean, as we all know, that is the most useful thing that people, the most helpful thing people can do is to share these Kickstarter campaigns. You can find me on social media. I am on Instagram and Twitter, Z Class Comics. Um, yeah, and I've got a couple of Patreon pages. I've got a Z Class page and a Kevvo Creates page. So that's about it. That's where you find me.
Awesome. Well, Kevo, Alex, this has been awesome. I totally can't wait to have you back on the show at some point. This has been
Thank
great.
you. Thank you. I
So
appreciate it. I would love to come back anytime. So I appreciate it. This has been a great conversation.
thank you so much, and thanks for hanging.